She scribbled little hearts in the corner of his diary, as if she were leaving invisible clues of love. She wasn't just an assistant. She was the only person who knew his mother's name without looking in the system, who brought him his coffee the way he liked it without him asking. He noticed, but he pretended not to notice, until the day when, with the coldness of an executive who has forgotten what it means to be human, he returned her diary with a dry comment. "Be more professional." She just smiled, and silently she killed each heart with a full stop. What he didn't know is that her love also had an expiration date, and when the contract ended, she didn't ask for an extension. She just left an absence so well calculated that even the clock in the meeting room seemed to go slow after she left. He continued his routine of numbers, goals, and meetings. He didn't even notice that the notes were starting to lose color, or that the reminders seemed less personal, until he started forgetting appointments that he had previously anticipated. The subtle chaos grew, but it wasn't forgetting an important meeting that destroyed him. It was the discovery that the dinner with investors that she always remembered was, in fact, his daughter's birthday, an appointment that she had written down with 2 stars and a heart, year after year, because he always forgot. Now, there was no star, no heart, and no her. Just the echo of a masterfully planned absence that didn't shout, didn't complain, just left. And when he finally wanted to apologize, she was already working somewhere else, where her talent was noticed, and where, perhaps, hearts weren't forbidden. If this story has already caught your attention in the first few seconds, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It makes all the difference in helping more people find stories like this. It was just another Monday in the mirrored building in Chicago's financial center, where the silence of the hallways was filled with the precise sound of her heels crossing the marble floor. Claire always arrived before everyone else, and her first gesture of the day was to place a cup of steaming coffee on his desk with just a drop of milk, just the way he didn't have to ask. The office was still waking up slowly, but she was already organizing her schedule with the delicacy of someone who knows the value of detail. Each appointment, each note, each reminder was handwritten in a firm and elegant script, always punctuated by small discreet hearts in the corners. Not out of affectation, it was the silent way in which Claire expressed what she didn't dare say, her repressed, contained, but absolutely real love for that man who didn't even know how to smile properly. His name was Ethan Miller, the CEO of a fast-growing tech company, known for his surgical intelligence and icy cool. He was the kind of boss who didn't say thank you for well-written emails or notice when someone spent more hours than they should have tweaking their slides at the last minute. But Claire noticed everything. She could tell when he had a migraine by the way he squinted. She knew he got tense on his daughter's birthdays because he didn't know how to please her. And most of all, she knew that behind that starched suit was a man who had never learned how to be truly loved. She wasn't naive. She knew it wasn't her place to care so much. She knew there was no room for feelings in his world, a world of spreadsheets and meetings and numbers, but still she kept scribbling hearts in the corners of his notebooks, like someone writing a silent note hoping that one day someone would read it. Claire never expected him to reciprocate, but maybe deep down she hoped he would notice. Just once, a gesture, a look, anything that would say, "I see you." But Ethan never did, or pretended not to. That particular morning, the day dawned grey, with a light rain running down the glass of the panoramic window. Claire was calmly writing down the day's schedule when Ethan entered the room without even greeting her. He dropped the folder on the table and simply said, "Can I review this before 9 a.m.? She nodded, without wiping the slight smile from her face, and, before he left, she drew another small heart on the edge of the page, the last one she would write. Claire's routine was marked by an almost choreographed precision. She arrived early enough to open the morning's emails, update the team's reports, and thoroughly review the day's commitments. Her headphones played soft instrumental music as she synchronized the directors' calendars and organized the printed folders with almost artisanal care. But it was only in Ethan's calendar that the details took on an intimate dimension. In addition to the times and names, she added small visual cues, a blue star for crucial meetings, a red exclamation point for critical alerts, and the ever-so-discreet hearts for family-related notes, like the lunch with his daughter or the call he always forgot to make to his sister on her birthday. At work, some colleagues would whisper mock Claire's memorized notes. Others simply thought it was funny, but she never reacted with irritation. She would just smile and say, "Everyone has their own way of remembering what matters." And for her, caring was more than a professional obligation. It was a daily choice. It was how she faced the world, with kindness, even when she got nothing in return. Ethan, on the other hand, operated on a frequency where efficiency was the only acceptable language. He never asked questions about anyone's personal life or stopped to compliment their efforts. Sometimes Claire wondered what it would be like to work for someone who said thank you without seeming like he was just filling a social void. But over time she stopped expecting it. She had learned to understand Ethan through his absences. He was a man shaped by silent losses, by a life where feelings were unaccessed archives, and yet she insisted on leaving her niceties scattered along the way. On certain afternoons, when he left for off-site meetings, Claire would pick up her phone and stare at the blank screen as if she wanted to write something, a text, a message, a confession perhaps. But she never wrote. She would just stare at his empty chair and wonder how much longer she could keep loving in silence. At night, when she got home, her mother would ask her if she was happy. Claire would say, yes, that everything was fine at work, that she had organized another day perfectly. And then she would change the subject. She would never admit it. But there were days when the mere fact that Ethan would show up wearing the tie she had helped him pick out for a meeting with suppliers, or repeat an expression that only she had used in the memos, was enough to make her believe that maybe he noticed, that maybe, deep down, he felt something too. But those moments were rare and fleeting, like lights flashing in the distance on a dark road, uncertainties that sparked her hope, but never enough to become certainty. So she remained there, firm, kind, always present, taking notes, caring, predicting, and without him knowing, silently sewing his heart between the lines of his life. It was a Thursday afternoon when the tension began to build. Ethan had just come from a tumultuous meeting with a group of Asian investors and entered the room visibly irritated. Claire, as always, remained calm, handing over the printed reports with precision and leaving without saying a word. But something about her meticulous organization, perhaps the little heart drawn at the bottom of the reminder to call Emily on her daughter's birthday, caught the attention of the CFO, who, leafing through the papers while waiting for Ethan, let out a quiet laugh. "This is cute," he commented, turning the page slightly. "Do you have a passionate assistant, or is this just an attempt to humanize the cold CEO?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He took the paper, looked at the small heart in the bottom corner and frowned. I'd never noticed those marks before. Or maybe I'd never had the courage to admit that they'd been there for a long time. But suddenly, that simple gesture seemed childish, overdone, out of protocol. "It's unprofessional," he muttered, almost to himself, and handed the papers back to the director. From that day on, perceptions changed. Little things that had previously gone unnoticed began to bother him. Claire's extreme care, the post-its with delicate notes, the reminders with soft words, everything began to seem too intimate. And Ethan, a man accustomed to building walls between himself and the world, began to see this delicacy as a risk. He didn't say anything on the first day or the second, but he started to notice. He noticed that the messages were always kind, that the coffees came with a touch of affection, and that the planners seemed more like a silent diary than a work tool. Instead of being grateful for the impeccable organization that kept him from missing deadlines, he started to get annoyed by the way it was done, as if her zeal was an attempt to invade a space he had sworn to keep sterile. Claire noticed the change. She felt it in the air. The shorter glances, the muted thank yous, the subtle distancing. But she didn't let it shake her, at least not on the outside. She continued with the same care as always. If there was something wrong, she preferred not to know. It was easier to pretend that everything was the same as before than to admit that her affection might be becoming a nuisance. And so the days went on, between looks that avoided and silences that shouted, until the morning came when Ethan called her to talk privately. She walked into the room smiling, carrying the day's agenda with the calm confidence of someone who believed she was doing everything right. But what she received in return was a hard look and words that would change everything. Claire entered the room with her usual elegance, holding the day's agenda as if she were offering more than just commitments. She was silently offering her care, her time, her presence. Ethan didn't look up right away. He was sitting in front of his laptop, typing furiously, as if each key was a way of holding back something he couldn't name. When he finally looked at her, his eyes didn't hold anger, just distance, a kind of coldness that doesn't hurt with words but with absence. "Claire, we need to talk," he said, his voice low and blunt. She kept her smile, a little hesitant. She sat across from him with impeccable posture, still sure that maybe it was just a scheduling adjustment or a new project that he would entrust to her as he had done other times, but he was direct. "About your notes, the details in the reminders, the drawings." She frowned slightly, not understanding at first. "The hearts," he added, placing his hand on the diary, and opening it to a random page, where a small red heart lay next to the phrase, "Bring flowers to Emily." Claire blinked slowly. She didn't say anything. She just listened. "I know you're dedicated, extremely competent, but maybe it's best if we keep everything in a more professional tone from now on," he concluded, with a sigh that sought to end the subject before she could even respond. She took a deep breath, just once, and nodded. There were no tears in her eyes, no tremor in her voice, not even embarrassment. Just a solid silence of someone who understood exactly what he meant, and most importantly, what he didn't have the courage to say. She closed the diary delicately, like someone closing a door, and answered simply, "Of course, Mr. Miller, as you prefer." Then he got up, left the room as elegantly as he had entered, and walked down the hallway without looking back. No one understood anything. She didn't tell anyone. But that night, when he got home, he opened his own diary, went through pages full of reminders, scribbles and little hearts, and began to tear out pages by pages, not out of anger, not out of sadness, but out of respect for the pain that had been arriving without fanfare. The next day, Claire arrived at her usual time, but something had changed. The reminders were still there. The tasks were still done with excellence. But the little hearts? They were gone. In their place were full stops. Simple, straight, hard, like someone responding with silence, like someone stopping to wait. The following days passed with a strange normality, the kind that disguises what has been broken under the well-executed routine. Claire continued to arrive at the same time, delivering reports punctually, reviewing documents with surgical attention. But there was something in the way she now typed, faster, straighter, that betrayed the absence of something that had previously softened her gestures. Ethan didn't notice it right away. He continued to immerse himself in his marathon of meetings, reports, and strategic decisions. The world was too urgent for him to pay attention to subtleties, but the effects of the change began to show themselves as small cracks, nothing glaring, just signs. The first was a printed calendar without underlining. Everything was there, but it lacked the visual code Claire had masterfully created. No stars, no arrows, no hearts. Meetings blurred together. The occasional appointment slipped his mind. The reminder to buy. His daughter's gift came too late, and the dinner with the board members was forgotten, hastily rescheduled by an intern. Ethan, who had always been praised for his accuracy, began to seem a little absent-minded. Claire, for her part, didn't change her expression. If someone commented on the change in the style of the agendas, she would simply respond with, "I standardized the formats, it's clearer for everyone." There was no resentment in her voice, but there was no warmth either. It was the same tone she used to say the coffee in the conference room was ready. Neutral, invisible. One Friday afternoon, as Ethan was leafing through his own planner and wondering why he had the strange feeling that he was forgetting something important, a thought crossed his mind like a whisper. Why didn't I have to worry about this before? And almost instantly, an image came to him. Claire, with her watchful eyes, and that calm that made chaos seem manageable. He closed the planner slowly, but didn't say anything. Not yet. The next week, during an internal presentation, Ethan noticed that the slides were impeccable but cold. No more of the sidebars Claire usually inserted. No more of the handwritten notes on the printed copies with the observations that no one asked for but everyone appreciated. It bothered him. And then he looked at her, sitting in the back of the room, silently taking notes. For the first time in a long time, he felt like she was far away, even though she was only a few feet away. It wasn't the absence of hearts that weighed heavily now. It was the absence of what they represented, the absence of someone who cared more than she should have, and who, precisely because of that, had been silenced. At first, Ethan tried to rationalize the failures. A missed reminder, too many meetings, a delay in responding to important emails, overwork, a forgotten call to an international partner. He missed a warning. But inside him, a growing uneasiness was growing. It wasn't the world that was more disorganized. It was him. And for the first time, he began to realize the magnitude of what had previously gone unnoticed. Claire's silent presence wasn't just functional. It was structuring, invisible, but essential. Like the morning light that comes through the window without you noticing, until the day it doesn't come. On the afternoon, he missed his flight to the conference in Dallas due to a trivial time error in his digital calendar. Ethan entered her office, breathing heavily and with crushed pride. "Have you seen my schedule for today?" he asked, trying to hide the tension in his voice. Claire looked up calmly. "Yes, it's up to date, as always. I missed the flight. It was at 3. It was written as 5, he said, running his hand through his hair, uncomfortable. She didn't smile. She didn't make fun of him either. She just replied, "I don't usually enter flight times anymore, since they centralized everything in the logistics app." He nodded, silently, but something in him hurt. A part of him he didn't know was still alive. Ethan began to notice the little things. The notes were now just words, objective, precise, and cold. The coffees no longer smelled of care, but tasted of protocol. The spreadsheets were complete, but without side notes, without that human touch that helped him make decisions faster. For the first time, he missed the thing he had never asked for, and that he now understood was irreplaceable. Instinctively, he went to his old email and found one of the messages Claire used to send him on the nights he was away. "Good luck tomorrow, Mr. Miller. Bring that rare but effective smile." He never replied to any of them, but he read them all. And in that moment, he understood what he had missed. Or worse, what he himself had asked to be removed. The world around him kept turning. The company was growing. Investors were pushing. But Ethan couldn't find the same balance anymore. It was as if a piece of his internal clock was missing. It wasn't efficiency that had driven him before. It was the trust that someone else was taking care of the details while he took care of the big picture. And now, alone in the details, he was starting to crumble inside. It was a typical Wednesday when Ethan, sitting down to review the documents for a shareholders' meeting, noticed that the summary sheets Claire always prepared were missing. Little pages that contained, almost magically, everything he needed to know in 5 minutes. They weren't there. And for the first time in a long time, he felt fear, not of failure, but of loneliness. Her absence was now a real, palpable, undeniable void. And it wasn't just in the papers. It was in the temperature of the room, in the colder silence, in the fact that her good afternoon now sounded like any other employee's. Ethan's daughter had a birthday that week. For 3 years in a row, Claire had reminded him 2 days in advance and discreetly slipped a note with gift. Ideas into the inside pocket of his jacket. This time there was no ticket, no reminder, no warning. When he looked at the calendar and saw the date, his stomach dropped. It was too late. He had already missed it. She picked up her cell phone and called Emily, who answered in a tired voice. "It's over, Dad, everything's okay," but he wasn't, because Claire had always known what he was trying to hide. That missing these moments wasn't just distraction, it was fear. Fear of failing as a father, and she had, without saying it, helped him be better. Now, without her, he felt himself regressing, returning to his rawest, coldest self, the self she had quietly softened. That night, he stayed alone in the office until late. He went through old folders, reviewed emails, looked at the team photos on the bulletin board. In one of them, Claire was smiling in the background, holding a box of files. It froze him, because for the first time, he saw what had always been there. Her. Always behind the scenes, always carrying what he didn't even realize was heavy. The phone in the room rang, breaking the silence. It was security, announcing that the building would be closing in 15 minutes. Ethan thanked him and hung up, but he didn't leave. He sat there, staring at the empty chair where Claire used to sit, and for the first time in years, he felt like apologizing, not for anything he'd said, but for everything he'd been unable to see. The following Monday, Claire didn't show up. There was no advance warning, no message, no note left on the table, just emptiness. At first, Ethan thought it was an unusual delay. Then he thought it might be an emergency. But when the clock struck 11, he knew. She was gone. And this time, it wasn't just for a few hours. He called the HR coordinator and asked for her. He received a respectful but direct look. Claire handed in her resignation letter 10 days ago. She served her notice discreetly. She said she preferred to leave quietly. Today would be her first day out of the company. Ethan was silent. He didn't know what to say. He felt a strange dizziness, like someone who discovers too late that they left a door open and now everything inside has been blown away by the wind. He gathered up his papers with trembling hands, pretending to concentrate, but there was no focus anymore, only one question hammering inside him. Why didn't she say anything? In the days that followed, the mood in the company changed as well. Some noted her absence with surprise, others with regret. But no one seemed to understand the real impact of Claire's departure. No one, that is, except Ethan. Emails were now answered by another assistant. Reports arrived punctually, but without soul. There was a mechanical order, but there was no heart. The kind of order that doesn't sustain a structure for long. One afternoon, while leafing through an old notebook that had been forgotten in his office, Ethan found a page with Claire's handwriting on it. It was a note from months ago. There was nothing on it but a regular reminder, but in the bottom corner, very small, was a heart. The last one. It broke him. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. A memory came back to him, clear as day. The day he asked her to be more professional. The words she used, the tone, and most of all, what was behind the phrase, the fear of dealing with something he couldn't name. That night, Ethan did something he had never done before. He got in his car and drove to the address listed in HR. It was a simple street, lined with trees and windows with flowery curtains. He parked and stood there looking at the building. He thought about going up, about apologizing, about saying everything he hadn't had the courage to say before. But he didn't get out of the car. She stood there for 20 minutes, silent, staring at a window that might have been hers, and then he left, taking with him an absence that weighed more heavily each day. Over time, the hallways that once throbbed with the quiet rhythm of Claire's presence grew cold. People kept working. Results came, but something essential had slipped away. Ethan found himself reliving small moments with her, as if they were scenes from an old movie. The way she knew how to anticipate his questions, the way she arranged the papers on her desk without making a sound, the quiet smile with which she gave him a personal reminder, even when he didn't deserve it, and most of all, the way she took care of him without him even realizing he needed to be taken care of. During a meeting with the new marketing team, he was distracted by a note written in a regular pen, in hurried handwriting, with no markings. He stared at the sheet for several seconds, as if searching for some familiar feature. But nothing there touched him. Nothing carried the delicate weight of true attention. It was all practical, empty. and for the first time, he understood how much he was spoiled by silent gestures that he now missed like air. It was on a rainy afternoon that he allowed himself to return to the company bulletin board, where old photos of the team were displayed. He stopped in front of a picture from 3 years ago, in which Claire appeared in the background, holding an improvised birthday cake for a crying colleague. That memory hurt, because no one did that anymore, and because he had never noticed the humanity she spread in every corner, like someone cleaning a room without being seen. That night, when he got home, he opened a drawer where he kept old notes, greeting cards, and little mementos of moments he had forgotten to throw away. There he found a letter that Claire had written for the company's anniversary. It was a collective text, read publicly, but now, rereading it with different eyes, he recognized every trace of her sensitivity between the sentences. She had always been there, always, until he made a point of pushing her away. On an impulse, Ethan opened his computer and typed her name into LinkedIn. He found it. Claire was now at a competing company with a higher position, a new smile, and a simple description on her profile. "I organize chaos with kindness." That disarmed him inside, because he had always known that she organized everything, but he never imagined that when she left, she would also reorganize her own life. And that maybe, just maybe, she had discovered what it was like to be valued without having to erase her own kindness. Ethan closed his laptop, unable to breathe properly. For the first time he understood how much space he had lost, and he also understood that she hadn't left him out of anger. She had left him because he himself had pushed her, with words that seemed cold, but carried the cowardly fear of loving someone who made him feel too much. In the months that followed, Ethan became a different version of himself, not by conscious choice, but by a gradual emptying. Claire's absence revealed layers of his own fragility that he preferred not to see. He began arriving earlier, reviewing for himself what she had previously anticipated perfectly. He always felt late, always incomplete, like someone trying to put together a puzzle with missing pieces. But what hurt the most was not the work. It was the silence. Her silence. The silence after she left, and most of all, his own silence, when he had the chance to speak and chose not to. On a cloudy Sunday, he decided to visit the bookstore where she had mentioned working briefly before becoming an assistant. He didn't know if he would still have a connection with the place, but he had to try. When he arrived, he was greeted by a white-haired lady with a motherly smile. He hesitated before asking, "Excuse me, have you met an employee named Claire Benson? She worked here a few years ago." The lady smiled. "Claire? How could I forget? She was the kind of person who marked books with loving messages for readers. Sometimes she left notes between the pages, with phrases like, 'This chapter will touch you, stay tuned.'" Ethan smiled sideways, his eyes brimming with tears. "That looks like her." The lady tilted her head, curious. "Is she okay? I haven't seen her since." He just nodded, not knowing how to respond. He walked back to the car with a strange feeling, as if he had touched something precious that he had never known how to hold. On the way back, he passed a flower shop, and without thinking, stopped. He bought a simple bouquet with the EE. Flowers that Claire always used to decorate the reception on special occasions. It was like a code that only he now understood. The next morning, he discreetly left the bouquet on her old desk. No one commented, but he knew that somehow the gesture said what he had never had the courage to say. And there, in that small solitary reconciliation, an internal movement began that led him to take actions he would never have imagined before. He called meetings with the team he never followed. He learned the names of the newer employees. He sent an email to each employee who completed 1 year at the company. And on birthdays, he began to remember the dates, even if he had to write them down in a notebook by hand. It wasn't an attempt to be like Claire. It was an attempt to not be who he was before she was. He didn't know if she would ever return. He didn't know if what he had lost could be restored. But he knew with absolute certainty that someone like her changes not only the environment in which she passes, she also changes the people who dare, even without knowing it, to love in silence. Ethan's transformation was neither sudden nor miraculous. It came slowly, like a mist that dissipates, revealing the landscape that had always been there. The company's employees noticed, at first with surprise, but then with respect. He began to listen more. He noticed details. He began to praise small accomplishments that he had previously ignored. And even though he still had a certain stiffness in his shoulders, there was something new in his voice, something that reminded him of longing. One morning, he walked into the meeting room and saw a note left by a new employee on the table. It was a simple reminder, but there was a childish line in the corner of the page, a little flower drawn in pencil. He stopped. He looked. He didn't comment. He just smiled with a discreet bitterness in his eyes, as if he understood that there are gestures that can no longer be pruned. It was during a corporate event that he saw Claire again. She walked across the room with the same elegant posture as always, now accompanied by an entire team that listened to her attentively. Her name tag indicated a management position in a partner company. When their eyes met, it was like a brief stumble in time. Neither of them approached immediately. There was too much history between their steps. Later, as the event was winding down, he approached. She was with a colleague, who quickly moved away when she saw him arrive. Ethan stopped at a respectful distance. "Claire," she smiled, restrained. "Mr. Miller." The formality of it all sounded like a reminder that the roles had changed, but her tone held no rancor, only distance. "Are you okay?" he asked, quieter than he intended. "Very much," he replied. "I hope you are too." He nodded, and the silence between them said more than any conversation could have. There was no room for excuses, no belated apologies. But there was recognition, and maybe deep down a hint of quiet pride on her part in seeing the man he was trying to be. Before he walked away, Ethan took a small white envelope from his pocket. He handed it to her with an almost shy gesture. "It's nothing important. Just a reminder." Claire took it, nodded her thanks, and didn't open it there. When she unwrapped the envelope hours later, she found an antique leather bookmark. Discreetly engraved on it was the words, "For those who always wrote down what the world forgot." She held the object for a while. She didn't cry, she didn't smile, she just kept it, because there are gestures that don't ask for a response. And that was one of them. After that meeting, Claire returned to her routine, unchanged. She continued to lead her team with the same firm delicacy she had always had, but now with the freedom to be who she was, without having to apologize for the way she chose to handle things. At her new company, there were no sideways glances at her. Hand-drawn notes, no bosses bothered by minor details. There, her sensitivity was seen as competence, and that made all the difference. She didn't talk to anyone about the past, or about Ethan. But every now and then, when someone handed her a poorly formatted spreadsheet or a misaligned schedule, she remembered the days when everything was fine-tuned to the millimeter, and her heart, silently, swayed. Ethan, on the other hand, continued to rebuild not only his image, but his essence. He began to conduct internal mentoring sessions, something he had previously delegated without thinking. In one of the sessions, he heard from a young intern, "I like the way you pay attention to details. It makes us seem like we matter." That phrase resonated with him for days, because that was what Claire had always done. She made him feel important, even though he didn't deserve it, and he had wasted it. But now, as best he could, he tried to give that back to the world, not as redemption, but as a way to keep going. His relationship with his daughter had also changed. He started calling her more often. He started remembering dates for himself. He started listening without rushing. One night, she said something to him that broke him. "Dad, you're lighter. Like, more human." He laughed, a little embarrassed, but kept it as a secret prize. Because deep down, he knew the origin of this transformation. And he also knew that, even from a distance, Claire was still part of what he was becoming. In the conference room, the bulletin board now had motivational messages, handwritten by different employees. One day, Ethan read one of them with special attention. It said, Kindness is not distraction. It is precision of the heart. And in the bottom corner, there was a small drawing. It wasn't a heart. It was a period. But it was drawn as if it were blossoming, as if to say, "This is where it ends, but something new has begun." He stood there for a few seconds in front of the note. Then he took a picture. He didn't know who had written it, but something inside him told him that it was the kind of gesture that she inspired in people, even when she wasn't there. And in that moment, he understood that Claire wasn't just a good assistant. She was a living reminder of what the world can be like when someone decides to care, even when they don't ask for it, even when they don't accept it. It was late fall when the annual Innovation Leadership Conference was held in Seattle, a prestigious event where big names in the market were honored for their contributions to corporate culture. Ethan was invited to speak as a representative of a new model of human management, something that, ironically, he would never have agreed to do years ago. He put on his best suit and calmly went over his words, but he felt a slight anxiety in his chest, not because of the stage, but because he knew that Claire would also be there that night, not by chance, but as one of the event's honorees. The ceremony took place in a renovated old theatre, with velvet seats and soft lights reflected in dark wood. When Claire was called to the stage, Ethan was sitting in the third row, slightly to the left. She walked up with firm steps, her hair tied in a simple bun, wearing a dark blue dress that contrasted with the light from the spotlight. She smiled, holding the glass trophy discreetly, and began her speech without exaggeration, with the same serenity with which she always wrote the morning, reminders of a life he had failed to value. "I was always told that the corporate world was too tough for niceties," she began, her voice firm but soft. "That being efficient required cutting through feelings. But I discovered that kindness is also a strategy, and that taking care of details, including human ones, is a way to build legacies." The words echoed. Many applauded. But Ethan felt as if each sentence were written directly into his memory. She named no names. She made no accusations. But her words were unintentionally the most poetic justice he could receive. Later, during the cocktail party, the two met briefly in the side room, where few people were walking around. She was holding a glass of water. He was holding a cup of coffee. They looked at each other for a few seconds without rushing. "Your speech," he said hesitantly, "was beautiful." "Thank you," she replied. "I just told you what I learned from trying to be invisible for a long time." He lowered his eyes, his smile carrying weight. "You were never invisible, Claire. I was just too blind to see." She didn't answer right away. She just looked up at him with immense serenity. "Life takes care of us, sometimes with silence, sometimes with distance, but it always takes care of us." Before leaving, Claire took something small from her bag, wrapped in old notebook paper. She handed it to him with a simple gesture. Ethan opened it right there. It was a torn sheet of paper from the first planner she had ever organized for him. Next to an appointment from years ago, meeting with Emily, 6 p.m., was a small red heart, and below it, written in pencil, was the phrase, "If you ever remember, it's because you still matter." He held the paper with trembling hands. He wanted to say so much, but he just nodded, because he understood. This was not a gift. It was a reminder of everything he was, of everything she carried, and of what he now needed to remember so he would never forget again. She walked away, walking slowly through the crowd until she disappeared into the hall. And there, standing with the paper in his hand, Ethan understood that life had given him the chance to change. But it would not give him back what he had wasted. This was karma, not punishment, but a lesson, the gentle echo of a love that was never declared, but that was strong enough to transform him even after it was gone. When he returned home that night, he opened his new personal planner, and for the first time he drew a little heart next to his daughter's name. Then he smiled. It wasn't a professional gesture, but it was human, and anyway, he was ready to be one. If this story touched your heart in any way, leave a like, because it shows that there is still room for true feelings. Write in the comments, silence is also an answer. Only those who have felt it will understand. And if you are not yet registered, sign up now so as not to miss the next stories that remind us of what really matters. And since you're here, click on the video that is appearing on your screen now. It's another story of someone who was underestimated and responded with silence, presence, and transformation. You won't forget it.